As gamers, it's fair to say that, for whatever reason, there will always be certain games that you will always hold dear to your heart and you will always come back to. Regardless of when it was released, what console it was released on, or even if it was a decent game or not. One series of games that I hold particularly close to my 40-year-old heart is Capcom's Ghouls and Ghosts series, more particularly the arcade, ZX Spectrum, Mega Drive and SNES versions. From first seeing it in the arcades, I've been a die-hard fan of Arthur and his battle against the dark forces to repeatedly save Princess Primprin/Huss/Guinevere. While there have been many versions, conversions and iterations of the game, this video will just be focusing on the 4 previously mentioned versions. So, welcome to Fistful of Gamepad, I'm Rick, and this is my review of Ghouls and Ghosts, my first video game obsession. Known as Dai Makaimura in Japan, which translates as Great Demon World Village, Ghouls and Ghosts is a sequel to Ghosts and Goblins, which was released by Capcom in the arcades in 1985. My first exposure to Ghouls and Ghosts was at my local swimming baths, where I would go every Monday evening for my obligatory swimming lesson. Once I'd finished my lesson, I would get changed, leave the changing room stinking of chlorine, and with my eyes burning, would meet my mum and aunt upstairs in the gallery area, where I was rewarded for not drowning with a drink and a snack from the vending machine. As you made your way up through the faux black marble staircase to the gallery area, to the left were a cluster of 2 or 3 arcade cabinets, glowing in all their late 80s glory. Housed in 2 of the 3 cabinets were 1942, the classic plane-based shooter, which you would find in every leisure centre, arcade, cinema or chippy at the time, and Double Dragon, again another stone cold classic. But it was the cabinet at the end that caught my eye, where you would find a little armour-clad bloke running on a lush green lawn against a jet black background in a desolate, eerie graveyard, being pursued by all manner of ghoulish foes. The more I investigated it, the more I was intrigued by this little silver bloke hurling what looked like lances at mini Grim Reapers. After convincing my mum to part with 20p, I approached the cabinet, popped the 20p in and proceeded to die very, very quickly. And no sooner had I started it than it was game over. But that brief moment of gameplay sparked my interest and love for the game, and from then on, a game of Ghouls and Ghosts became part of my post-swimming lesson ritual. That was until they swapped it out for another game, which, if I remember, was Street Fighter 2. At the time, the arcade version of Ghouls and Ghosts looked amazing, and I'd still say, still holds up today. From the rolling demo previews, the story is very straightforward, in that you, Arthur, have to rescue the princess. Usual video game fare then. However, the full story is that, set 3 years after the events of Ghosts and Goblins, Lucifer has stolen the souls of everyone in the land, including Arthur's love, Princess Primprin. So Arthur sets out to defeat Lucifer and return all the souls back to the people of the kingdom. Ghouls and Ghosts is a side-scrolling action platformer where you must make it from one end of the level to the other, defeating all the enemies along the way, which culminates with the obligatory end-of-level boss fight. The game is divided up into 5 stages, 6 including the final showdown with Lucifer. As you fight your way through each level, you're pitted against a wide variety of demonic hellions. These range from skeleton murderers, vultures and rock turtles, to flying goblins, noops and evil hands, with each level culminating in a showdown with a huge end-of-level boss. Each enemy kill rewards you with points, and if an enemy is carrying a pot, you can also be rewarded with additional bonus points or even a new weapon. Along the way, you'll also come across treasure chests, which, once opened, will either contain a new weapon or, more often than not, will contain a magician who will delight in casting a spell on you to turn you into a helpless old man or an even more helpless duck. Arthur can take 2 hits. One leaves you in your boxer shorts but still alive, but take a second hit and our gallant hero is reduced to a pile of bones. Our hero Arthur has a varied arsenal of weapons which he can use to dispatch the demonic denizens. These include a lance, a dagger, sword, an axe, discus, and the all-out frankly useless torch, or fireball as I always called it. And then there's the psycho cannon, which is the only weapon that can defeat Lucifer. Each of the 7 weapons has their own pros and cons, and you have unlimited ammo. My go-to weapon though was always the lance or the dagger. Never, and I mean never, the torch. Along the way you can collect the mystical golden armour, which, once charged, will allow you to release a powerful magical attack depending on which weapon you have. In typical arcade fashion, you only get 3 lives, and then you're treated to the continue screen. Across the top of the screen you'll find the usual information like your score, time left and high score. Along the bottom you'll find your current weapon, number of lives left, and if you have the golden armour, your power gauge. Every time you start or restart a level, you're shown a map of where you are and how far you have left to go. Each level has a checkpoint at roughly halfway through, which is where you'll restart when you die. And you will die. A lot. Controlling Arthur is simple. He can move up, down, left, right, jump, and can fire his weapon in those 4 directions, which comes in very handy as Lucifer's legion of loathsome lackeys will be attacking you from all angles. Some levels do have varying routes you can take, but they ultimately all lead to the same end of level boss. Ghouls and Ghosts the arcade is an arcade game, so that should tell you everything you need to know regarding its difficulty. The game can be relentlessly, punishingly difficult initially, but not unfair, and once you get used to it and have pumped enough 20p's into the arcade, you'll get to know the attack patterns of the enemies, know how to trigger the treasure chests, and even some game exploits. Ghouls and Ghosts is often described as the original Souls game, which I think is a very fair and accurate description. The game has a very steep learning curve, there are no tutorials outside of the preview screens. Sometimes you'll find yourself in a situation where you can't proceed forward without having to take a weapon you don't necessarily need or want. Other times you may jump over the weapon, only to find that you are then thrown back into the weapon and have collected it after being hit by an enemy, which can be very frustrating, especially if it's the torch that you've collected. However, this can be rectified if you hang around long enough for another pot-carrying enemy to come by who may be carrying a better weapon. However, you need to be mindful of the time that's constantly counting down, as if you run out of time, it's an instant death. Replay-wise, obviously playing the arcade version first, it had huge replay value, as the graphics and sound were the best that you were going to find at the time, and you would always be wanting to be getting to the next spooky level to see what demonic enemies and screen-filling bosses will be awaiting you. Alas, this was a typical arcade machine and designed to take your money, and would make things as difficult as possible for you to advance and see these further levels. Unfortunately at the time, my replaying opportunities were limited to my post-swim 1 play per week, where I would then have to wait till the following week and make it through my next swimming lesson before I was given another 20p to dive back in. No pun intended. Each level in Ghouls and Ghosts is dark and eerie, with a real gothic feel to them, and it's clear that the developers were big horror fans. Right from the first level, you're treated to some brilliantly detailed graphics, with the decaying remains of people speared to crucifixes and skulls scattered about everywhere, from being part of the guillotines to being buried underground. I love how the skeleton murderers, as they're officially called, although I always refer to them as Grim Reapers, would peer from behind the scenery and look around before emerging, or when you vanquished a vulture, they explode in a flurry of feathers that gently drift down to the floor. Even when you die, the way Arthur is thrown back into a pile of bones and his skull slightly falls back, it's one of the all-time great death animations. Each of the levels is as detailed as the last, with the developers using Capcom's CPS arcade system to show the devastation and general feeling of death in each level. From the destroyed windmills in the village of Decay, aka level 2, to the crumbling castles in Baron Rankel's tower, aka level 3. The end of level bosses in Ghouls and Ghosts are huge, from the scream-filling Shielder, who is sporting a bleach blonde mullet that's straight out borrowed from Kiefer Sutherland in The Lost Boys, to Omi, the giant slug-like boss of the Crystal Forest, aka level 4, where you have to destroy its 5 pulsating hearts while being attacked by maggots that emerge from the hearts, as well as red worms that burrow out from beneath its skin. The sound in Ghouls and Ghosts perfectly complements the game's visuals. It's quirky but also creepy, with each stage's music matching its tone and feel. This is where you are also introduced to the now iconic music of levels 1 and 2. Which you still find in the series of games to this day. I must admit though, there is something I find really patronising about the sound effects when you lose your armour, and even more patronising when you die. It's like the game is mocking you, saying, "Ha ha, you died," or "Ha ha, you died, you're crap," but this just spurs you on to get better at the game. The pre-level map music is very effective in getting you psyched up and ready to head into battle. Same with the celebration music, which plays when you kill the end of level boss. This is a very welcome contrast after the tense music which is playing while you're fighting the boss. After it was removed from my local swimming baths, my only way of getting to play Ghouls and Ghosts would be the usual places, such as arcades, cinemas, or when the local fair came to my town, as they would always have an arcade of it. But Ghouls and Ghosts always stayed on my mind. So, you can imagine my excitement when I was flicking through the December '89 issue of Your Sinclair magazine, which was our go-to ZX Spectrum magazine at the time, or as we called them, Speckies. I saw a review for Ghouls and Ghosts. The game that I could only play in arcades was coming to my 8-bit micro, and I would be able to enjoy all the action of the arcade in my home. Sort of. Luckily for me, my birthday was just after Christmas and was the perfect opportunity to get the game.
Happy birthday to me!
Ordering the game from one of the many mail order companies who would advertise in the pages of Your Sinclair, because that's how we did it back in the day, and after an agonisingly almost 2-week wait for the game to be delivered due to waiting for the cheque to clear, and for you younger viewers who may be asking what is a cheque and why and how does it clear, just ask your parents. I ordered the disc version for my +3 128K, which still works to this day. As soon as it arrived, and after I'd finished marvelling at the amazing box art, I ran upstairs, popped the disc in, and was ready to continue my adventures where I left them in the swimming baths, and hopefully get past the first level, or at least to the end of level boss. Again, similar to all home conversions at the time, this was not going to be an arcade experience in my bedroom, as my trusty 8-bit micro wasn't going to be able to match that of the arcade version. But unlike when I first played the Specky version of Operation Wolf, having seen the scaled down graphics of Ghouls and Ghosts in magazines, I was now much more aware of what to expect, which did help soften my disappointment. Even the screenshots on the back of the box were not that of the Specky version, but this was common for the time. After sitting through the very bold loading screen, you're treated to one of the many iconic pieces of music from the series as the title screen rolls. Once starting the game, the first thing that strikes you is the graphics. They are not a patch on the arcade. The colourful, detailed graphics of the arcade with depth and texture have been replaced with very flat, significantly downgraded ones, with very few colours on screen. Levels are sparse in comparison, with the hordes of monstrous minions who are looking to maim you, now replaced with barely a handful. But this was the best you were going to get at the time on the Spectrum, and even though each level consists of usually no more than 3 colours, meaning that actually seeing Arthur and any oncoming enemies can be a challenge as they all tended to blend into the background, again, this was the best you were going to get at the time. Even though you can't really tell if Arthur is wearing his armour or not, and the lance and daggers look more like syringes, the game does its best graphically within its limitations, which are very limited. The graphical shortcomings of the Spectrum version though are made up for in its gameplay, which mimics the arcade version the best it can, and does a decent job in the process. The checkpoints are all there, all the weapons are there, the enemies are there, even though the bosses are nowhere near as screen filling as in the arcade. The treasure chests are there, the special armour is there, complete with special abilities, Arthur fires in 4 directions, and the game is just as challenging as the arcade version. The sound, or should that be a lack of it, for me, is where Ghouls and Ghosts on the Spectrum shines. You have the title sequence music, pre-level map music, bursts of a jingle when you kill the end of level boss, and music at the game over screen and at the continue screen. Apart from that, all you get is a very limited sound of each level. Combine that with the huge black backdrops of the levels, and this creates a very creepy and atmospheric feeling of isolation, which is then pierced with a crashing, screeching sound when you kill the end of level boss, acting almost like a jump scare, perfectly matching the tone of the game. This is a perfect example of less being more, and using the limitations of the platform to great effect. Controls are responsive, but having no dedicated jump button as you press up to jump does create some frustrating issues, as if you want to fire upwards, you have to press up and then the fire button. Sounds very straightforward, right? Wrong. As this can lead you to inadvertently jumping up into the enemy that you're trying to kill. Having a dedicated jump button similar to the arcade would have easily sorted this. Controls are either by joystick or keyboard, and while back in the day I may have managed with them both quite comfortably, they really don't lend themselves well to the precise platforming required. Again, this is compounded by the lack of a dedicated jump button. Similar to the arcade, the game is tough, which isn't helped by the finicky controls. You still only get the traditional 3 lives, but this time you have 5 credits before you're sent back to the title screen. To this day, I have yet to complete Ghouls and Ghosts on the Spectrum. Level 3 is as far as I can get. Would I be able to get further if I was using a control pad with a dedicated jump button? Probably. And there are joypads that you can buy for the Spectrum, as well as being able to use a Mega Drive control pad. However, for this, you do need an adapter. Similar to the arcade, sometimes you have no choice but to take that lesser weapon just to be able to move forward. Even though I had the Spectrum version, I would still take every opportunity to play the arcade version if I found it on my travels, as there was always something niggling when I would play that home version, as it just wasn't like the arcade version that I had first played back in the day. After years of fighting my way through the 8-bit micro version of Ghouls and Ghosts, and not being able to get past level 3, an upgrade to my trusty specky version would come a few years later when I got my Mega Drive. Having seen Ghouls and Ghosts reviewed in issue 1 of Meme Machines, along with it being used in the advertising for the Mega Drive, when I saw it, I knew I had to track it down. Luckily, my local library rented out Mega Drive games, and for the princely sum of £3, Ghouls and Ghosts on the Mega Drive was mine for 1 week. And what a week that was, as Ghouls and Ghosts on the Mega Drive was leaps and bounds and then some better than the Spectrum version, as at the time it was almost on par with the arcade version, and certainly the closest we were going to get at the time. The game was developed in-house by Sega R&D 2, with the main programmer being none other than Yuji Naka, the man responsible for co-creating Sonic the Hedgehog and later Nights into Dreams. The less said about his recent goings-on, the better. Now, while not an arcade perfect conversion, as you'd have to go to the sharp 68,000 version for that, Ghouls and Ghosts on the Mega Drive certainly comes damn close. Controls are perfect, with a dedicated jump and fire button, making essential slick running, jumping and general platforming a delightful breeze. There are 2 difficulty modes to give you an actual chance of beating the game, and it even has a 2-player mode where you can team up with a friend and take it in turns to see how far you can get. Similar to the arcade, the game is tough but not unfair. Like the arcade, you have to complete the game twice. Now, having never got past level 1 at the time on the arcade version or level 3 on the Specky version, I was completely unaware of this. I'd heard rumblings around the playground about having to complete Ghouls and Ghosts twice, but I thought this could just have been the usual playground BS, much like the yellow tab deletes EA Games theory. So you can imagine my shock after fighting my way through to the end of the game, being told I've got to go back and do it all again.
Excuse me? Baking powder?
All the weapons are there, including the Psycho Cannon, as is the Golden Armour, and you can even exploit similar tricks that you could in the arcade version. Graphically, while not up to the standard of the arcade version, it still looks hugely impressive, even more so as this was released early in the Mega Drive's life. Most games that were released later on in the Mega Drive's life didn't look as good as Ghouls and Ghosts did. Levels were detailed and creepy, complete with appearing Grim Reapers and huge, screen-filling end-of-level bosses. Particular graphical touches I like are the silhouetted lightning strikes in the background at the level 1 boss and the backgrounds in level 2 and 3, which are very similar to the arcade. Some sacrifices had to be made to run on the Mega Drive. Backgrounds aren't as detailed and the trees blowing in the wind are missing a few frames of animation. Also, there are a few graphical glitches and dropouts here and there, but nothing that detracts from you enjoying the game. The sound of the game is simply spot on, with each level's music being grand and gothic, along with the weapon sounds being similarly spot on. I always thought that the music and sound effects always sounded way better in older Mega Drive games compared to later ones, and Ghouls and Ghosts is a prime example of this. Other differences compared to the arcade version are that Lucifer is now called Loki in the Mega Drive version. When you reach the end of your first run through, in the arcade version it's St. Michael who informs you that you need to go back and start again, while on the Mega Drive version he's called Valkyr. And finally, Princess Primprin is now called Princess of Huss. There are also some fantastically bad translations at the end credits which are definitely worth a read. Overall, the Mega Drive conversion of Ghouls and Ghosts was and still is a fantastic game and a huge step up from the subpar Specky version that I spent many an hour playing. For me, at the time, it was the best Ghouls and Ghosts could ever get. The end of the game finishes with Arthur and Princess of Huss, staring at Loki, with the final text being punctuated with a question mark. This had me very excited that there may be a sequel on the way. But as I would find out, I would have to jump consoles to be able to experience it. In the Christmas of 1994, my main present was a SNES and Donkey Kong Country, in the form of the Donkey Kong Country crate. The next day was the obligatory day out to the Boxing Day sales, back when you could actually get decent sales on Boxing Day, where we would venture out, brave the crowds and look to spend our Christmas money gifted to us from our grandparents. Having seen it reviewed in magazines, there was one game that was top of my list, and that was Super Ghouls and Ghosts. So, braving the skirmish that was a branch of Electronics Boutique on Boxing Day, I fought my way through the crowds and picked up a copy of Super Ghouls and Ghosts in the sale for the frankly bargain price of $19.99, as the game had already been out for a few years. I also picked up a second controller, third party of course, as per usual there were never any official ones available, and a copy of Super Return of the Jedi, which I'd seen reviewed on Bad Influence a few weeks before. Once we did get home, I removed the game from its striking purple box, booted it up, and was instantly made aware of how graphically superior it was to the Mega Drive version. Now, while not the significant head and shoulders upgrade that the Mega Drive version was over the Spectrum, Super Ghouls and Ghosts was a noticeable upgrade over its Mega Drive predecessor. Acting as a direct sequel to the Mega Drive version, Super Ghouls and Ghosts sees you once again take control of Arthur as you fight to rescue Princess Guinevere now, not Huss or Primprin, who has been kidnapped and taken to the demon realm by Sardius, Emperor of Evil. Right from the opening scenes, with its spooky and eerie outlining of the plot, it was obvious that Super Ghouls and Ghosts was what every good sequel should be. It was bigger and better than its predecessor. Showcasing the graphical power of the SNES, enemies and levels are more detailed, with enemies looking more demonic and ghastly. Backgrounds are more detailed, giving each level a bigger sense of scale, grandeur and depth. Particular graphical touches I like are in level 1, where the ground trembles and rises, the use of mode 7 in level 4 as the level rotates as you make your way through the ghoul's stomach with its gruesome fleshy innards, in level 5 with its detailed backgrounds of mountains and avalanches, complete with its use of layers of falling snow as the blizzard worsens, and in level 2 with its decimated ships in the background, complete with tattered sails that are limply hanging off. The sound and music in Super Ghouls and Ghosts is an absolute standout highlight for me, and perfectly demonstrates the power of the SNES's sound processor, which was designed by a certain Ken Kutaragi, the same guy who would go on to basically create the PlayStation. The music in Super Ghouls and Ghosts, composed by Mary Yamaguchi, is wonderfully grand and gothic with sinister undertones. Level 1 starts with a remixed version of the famous score, which makes it sound even more grand as it sounds like it was performed using a church organ. Each level's music perfectly complements its look and tone, and overall, it's one of my all-time favourite video game scores. Sound effects also take advantage of the SNES's superior sound, with enemy hits and deaths sounding satisfyingly squelchy, and upgraded weapons sounding beautifully beefed up. Even minor inclusions, such as the sound of the shattering ice-spiked tentacle things, all add to the immersion of the game. The game consists of 8 levels, or quests. These are the Dead Place, which is the famous Ghouls and Ghosts graveyard, the Rotting Sea, which is the obligatory water level, which sees you riding on rickety rafts as the sea moves up and down and gives you a real sense of distance as you see enemies on the horizon making their way closer to attack you. There's the Vermilion Horror, which is the obligatory fire level, and includes a very cool section where you're making your way along some rotating towers, which does mix things up a bit. However, the killer teddy bears that jump down and try and attack you don't seem really all that threatening. The Ghoul's Stomach is the 4th level, where you must fight your way through a fleshy rotating stomach before facing off against a Hydra at the end of the level. There's the Deep Chill, which is the obligatory snow level, which includes some great blizzard effects and music. Quest 6 is the Castle of the Emperor, followed by the Hallway of Ghouls, before the final showdown with Sardius in the throne room. However, in traditional Ghouls and Ghosts fashion, this is only after you go back and play through the whole game again, picking up Guinevere's enchanted bracelet, as this is the only weapon that can defeat Sardius, similar to that of the Psycho Cannon, and you'll only be able to find this weapon when you're on your second playthrough and have acquired the Golden Armour. To help you along the way, you'll have a selection of 7 weapons to choose from, ranging from old faithfuls such as the Lance and Dagger, to newer additions such as the Crossbow and the Tri-Blade, and even old crap weapons like the Torch make a reappearance. Each one of the weapons is upgradable when you acquire the Bronze Armour, and then when you acquire the Golden Armour, are then able to unleash a powerful magic attack. The Golden Armour is only able to be acquired when you're wearing the Bronze Armour, and when you do get it, you will also get the Moon Shield, which allows you to take an extra hit. You can also pick up the Sun Shield, which allows 3 extra hits to be taken, and also allows for faster summoning of your magic. While Super Ghouls and Ghosts carries on the traditional side-scrolling style of its predecessors, it does include some new additions and changes to the gameplay. Most noticeably is the double jump, which can allow Arthur to jump higher and further, and, with a well-timed second jump, allows for some very slick and smooth platforming. The second variation is how Arthur fires. Whereas in the previous game he was able to fire in 4 directions, those being up, down, left and right, in Super Ghouls and Ghosts he can only fire horizontally, so you have to make sure that you're in the optimal position or have the appropriate weapon to make sure that you're able to take down any enemies. The Magician is still hiding in treasure chests waiting to transform you into something that will hinder your quest. These include a bee, a seal, a baby and a girl, but if you're quick enough with your firing you can put them down easily. Occasionally, treasure chests will also contain leg traps, so it's important not to go running in once you've opened them. Similar to the previous game, each level of Super Ghouls and Ghosts has its own unique screen-filling end-of-level boss, which you must take down by hitting a specific area, so it's important to make sure that you've got the best weapon for the job. Unfortunately, all these upgrades and additions do come at a price, as Super Ghouls and Ghosts does suffer from moments of significant slowdown when things get busy on screen, even on level 1. This can affect gameplay, as you may often find that you're taking a hit due to things slowing down on screen. But overall, I wouldn't say it ruins any enjoyment of the game, it's just another challenge within the game that you have to overcome. In traditional Ghouls and Ghosts style, Super Ghouls and Ghosts is not easy. In fact, it's punishingly difficult, especially when you get to level 6 and are facing off against 2 red Eramet aces, who seem to have some sort of sixth sense which allows them to dodge any and every attack you try and throw at them. The difficulty of the game may cause some players to rage quit before they have used up all their continues, so the inclusion of save states on the SNES mini version is a very welcomed addition. But overall, I love Super Ghouls and Ghosts, and it's up there as one of my all-time favourite games. I bought it when it came on the Wii Virtual Console, and when I had the money to, one of the first games I rebought was Super Ghouls and Ghosts on the SNES. As was the style at the time back in the day, you would have to part exchange your current console and games to be able to afford the next and latest console. I regularly revisit and get my ass handed to me by this game, especially around Halloween time, as it's a perfect game to play around the spooky season. I'd even go so far as to say that it's my favourite of the series. Yes, both the arcade and Mega Drive version are great, but for me, Super Ghouls and Ghosts is my favourite version of one of my favourite game franchises. Other games will come along in the future, be they additions to the franchise or games that celebrate the franchise and act as a greatest hits collection. Arthur would also make appearances in other Capcom games, and even Enemies would get their own spin-off. For me, these 4 games are my favourite of the franchise, and whenever I feel like taking on the forces of evil with an armour-clad bearded bloke, it's Super Ghouls and Ghosts that I'll take off my shelf and pop in my SNES. And that about brings us to the end of my review of my favourite Ghouls and Ghosts games. Please do let me know in the comments below your favourite Ghouls and Ghosts games, and as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you again.